1917, she was built in Machias, Maine. A stately three-masted wooden schooner built by a Captain Lindsay, and he had two daughters, one named Lucy, one named Evelyn, and there he got the name Lucy Evelyn. She was supposedly a good luck ship, but as we read it today, she had some of the worst luck of any of those ships.
In 1917, the schooner Lucy Evelyn was built at Harrington, Maine. Before the schooner was completed, we could have sold the sails and rigging at a profit of $10,000. Now we cannot give the schooner away.
In 1917, it was just when steam was beginning to take over the sailing industry. So of course she was obsolete before even though she was fresh. She got lost at sea numerous times with poor captains. She was in Cape Verde Islands, and Captain Lindsay had to go get her.
He had a Captain Irons, I think it was, take her to some foreign port with potatoes, Maine potatoes. They hit a westerly, drove them halfway across the ocean. They battled their way back, and another westerly drove them all the way across the ocean. By then, all the potatoes were rotten. So when she came around the bend coming into Boston Harbor, they nicknamed her Rotten Potato Lucy. Story.
In 1946, Dad bought it at auction in Boston and had it towed from there by a tug called the Tug Jack, with supposedly 3 deckhands on her pumping the bilges, which they did not do. They got drunk. And when they were offshore, they said, "Here's your ship," and she was half sunk. And we have another tow. We got to cut her loose.
He and Mother took off to an auction in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and bought the schooner Lucy Evelyn for $1,550. Mother sat on a suitcase in the warehouse, waiting for Dad to acquire that ship. He won the auction by $50. The reason it was at the auction was that the original captain of the ship at that time, Captain Costa, had gone off course with the ship. It went on to the East African coast, and the crew caught scurvy. And the crew was suing the captain for the scurvy sickness, which is the lack of vitamin C. And that's why the ship was there for my dad to purchase.
The reason he bought the ship in the first place is my mother, when he was dating her, owned a little gift shop about the size of this house on the beachfront on a boardwalk. And the hurricane of '44 completely wiped it out. So everybody had good pickings on the beach because all the stuff that was in the gift shop was strewn 10 miles either side of it on the beach. Cute jewelry, whatever. And so we moved to a place called the Baldwin Hotel, which had another gift shop. That got flooded, and then it burned. So we moved out of that into a sporting goods shop, which is still a little gift shop on the main road, but it flooded. It flooded two seasons. It's flooded today, believe it or not. I just saw a picture of...
They're having a northeaster.
Yeah. Anyway, the island got covered with 2 or 3 feet of water at least once a year. So we learned to live with that, and Dad said, "Darn it, the next time we get a problem, it's going to float." So that was why he got the idea of getting a ship that would actually float. So here we go. We got a big ship, and it sat in the bay for a year, and Dad could look right down the end of the house, down the end of the street, and there she was. One morning he woke up and it was gone. And he said, "Oh my gosh, well, it drug anchor about half a mile closer to the inlet." And he went out, and of course it was still there. People riff-raff through it. he had to hire a guy named Jake Shear, a wonderful guy, who was the custodian of the ship and stayed on board because he didn't want anybody to get hurt, and he'd climb the rigging and take anything they could take off the ship.
Earliest memory of seeing the Lucy Evelyn, schooner Lucy Evelyn, was when she came into the inlet of Long Beach Island in a storm, and it looked horrible. One mast was off, the top masts, and she was ugly. She was black, dirty. Her ballast had been rocks, huge, big, heavy-duty rocks, and rats. And we had to get rid of all the rats and the rocks in order to lighten the ship enough so she could go over the sandbars.
I can remember unloading the rock ballast, filling the barrels with rocks. Even, I may have filled one barrel in a day where they were taking 100 barrels out a day. We removed 60 tons of rock ballast. Everyone in Beach Haven has a rock garden from these rocks, which are South African.
But the neatest thing of all, I think, is Mother, in her regimented way, took my brother and me out of school, which she never did, ever, and sat us in the station wagon at the end of the street where the ship was to pass by. And it was a tremendous nor'easter, and it brought the tides in.
This is when she sat in the bay for almost a year, until we had the highest tide in a long time, northeaster, and then a couple of local boats and a little Coast Guard boat towed her about 3 miles to the north, where we had dug a big basin to put her in.
Dad said that he felt the scraping of that keel on whatever was a sandbar or whatever, but that's how close they were.
How he brought that ship up on land was a Herculean effort, and he'd never get away with it today.
No.
He'd be in jail.
But we sat there, the three of us, Mother, my brother in the middle, and I, saying prayers that this ship would pass over. Rain, wind, the ship going right in front of us, the thrill of seeing that ship and making it. And Dad did not know where he was going with the ship. He knew that the tugboats were getting it into the marshland area on the bay side, but the land was not owned by my dad and Mother. They just found a spot which belonged and parked it. This is true. And bought it later.
The first night, she was landlocked. The quarterboard was stolen. And this is why we have the quarterboard that we have today, the one that remains. It's a shame because people just needed a souvenir. You know, it was so unique. Our masts were 114 feet tall. They were 28 inches in diameter at the base, and they were tapered. Longleaf yellow pine from Oregon. All little things I remember, and it was a magnificent thing. Once it got beached and I painted, it looked pretty rough.
So those dirty masts we decided we would have painted. So one day, while we were working around, these very much paint-splattered two men, one red-headed and one blonde, came by, and I said, "Where are you fellas painting it? You got all that paint on you. You look like me when I paint." He said, "We're painting the water tower in Beach Haven." Oh, I said, "You're just the fellas I need. How about painting our mast?" "Hey, that would be fun. We never did that before." I said, "Well, I don't think I can afford you. What'll you take in barter?" Well, we were selling fishing tackle at that point. They settled for 3 fishing rods, and we got our mast painted for fishing rods. And it was not an easy job because there was no set rigging, there was no pulleys to pull them up, so they went up like a telegraph worker would, or a telephone worker would, with straps and spikes on his shoes. He was way up here one day, and of course there's nobody around to speak of. He had a call from nature. And he said, the heck with coming all the way down. So he just let it fly from up there. It didn't hurt anything.
and then the work began. The tugboats pushed the ship from the port side, left side, and at one point, huge cables pulled by tractors pulled at the masts to pull that ship inland after a huge bathtub had been dug out by dredges. They siphoned out all the sand, and that ship just went into that bathtub and went kerplump. And then the sand was dredged in around it. And then it popped up a couple of feet, and it listed to the port side, and it went up in the bow. So it was lopsided. It was an extraordinary challenge. It was an extraordinary amount of work, an extraordinary amount of money, which Mother and Dad did not count on, to turn the ship into a rather decent interior, so people would go in and look at all the gifts that were inside.
The whole internal parts, the whole inside of the ship had to be sandblasted. So from the beach, we took 3 or 4 dump truck fulls of sand and a man in a spacesuit with a nozzle, and he completely sandblasted the whole inside of the ship.
And it was that wholesome white sand blasting the interior that then cleaned everything in the interior. And it was filthy, filthy dirty, black dirty. And so that was the first thing they did. To get into the ship, they had to go through almost 2.5 feet of solid wood to make the door to get in.
And that was a feat. That took almost a week to cut a doorway through the side of the ship, because she was 31 inches thick. And the chainsaws that they used kept breaking. They would run into these nails called trennels, which are hard hickory spikes. And they nailed her together with this, and a chainsaw blade hit that and break the blade. So they ended up back with a handsaw, man inside, man outside, you know. I can remember when it finally fell out of the hole.
And bit by bit, Mother and Dad literally changed that ship into the finest, most unusual gift shop in the world. Mother and Dad met on Long Beach Island, which is a tourist resort island, 18 miles long, 7 feet above sea level, and 2 and 3 blocks wide.
Mother's family originated most of Beach Haven. They were way, way back. They built the railroad that came over from the mainland.
Yeah.
And they owned a place called the Beck Farm, which was back then, gigantic home. And her grandfather owned that. And she spent the summers there because she was from the mainland in Philadelphia.
During the war, he studied in Duke to be a mechanical engineer. He went to work for Exxon and hated it, being an oiler in the Exxon. And now he's a college-educated guy, right? Went to the war. He had a curvature of the spine. They wouldn't let him go to war. He tried. So he built PT boats in Ventnor. He was quite proud of building the PT boats, which was a big war effort, you know. They were made of plywood. There again, all my woodworking abilities were pioneered by him, actually. I mean, he would say, let's make this. He always used the term, well, that joint wasn't so good, but it's not a church. So it didn't matter, you know, if the joints weren't quite right.
But Mother and Dad met at a party at my mother's home, which belonged to her grandfather. And my dad was a character, and he tripped going up 2 steps, going up to a platform and then down into the kitchen, an old-fashioned 1917 house. And he said, "Remind me never to come back here," to my mother. And my mother was not the kind of person you said that to. ever. And she thought he was horrible. That was my dad. That's how they met. Mother was given land on the beachfront, on the dune in Beach Haven, right in the middle of Beach Haven. And a shop was built for her by her grandfather, a Charles W. Beck. And that was her shop. It was called the Sea Chest. It was as square as you could ever want a shop to be. And it was very small. I don't know the measurement exactly, but a guess would be 30 by 30. It was that small.
And then he met Mother and fell in love with her sea chest on the boardwalk, and he got all involved in that. And she went somewhere, I heard the story. She had to go somewhere, and Dad managed the store, and he sold stuff. He said, "This is great. We got to do this. This is really great."
And one day, Dad came to see Mother. She went out at that time to go with a salesman to place an order. And she said, "Okay, Nat, would you please take over?" And Dad said, "Sure," not having one iota of any experience whatsoever in a gift shop. And in came Fritzie Gimbel of the Gimbel store. And Fritzie was a neighbor, summertime neighbor. And Dad sold her everything she picked up to the tune of $100, which was a lot of money in 1938. And when Mother came back from the salesman's appointment, Dad was absolutely overjoyed, exuberant. "Look what I've done. I like this business." And that's how they started. He asked her to marry him.
Mother was very outgoing and,
She was.
you know, she happy. Oh, she was a big lady, but she was always happy, really. And Dad was kind of more serious, but they made a great team together.
He was the financial part of the business. Mother was the decorative. She was the buyer, the organizer inside the shops. Displays, beautiful.
Arrangements.
Floral arrangements. Dad did the gardening. Mother did all the arrangements for the flowers.
I think Betty was the anchor.
And she loved it. She loved merchandising. You know, she wrote articles for the paper. I mean, she was always promoting.
People did follow Mother and Dad wherever they went because their thoughtfulness in merchandising, which was Mother's real gift, they got from buying a gift, they got a box for the gift, the tissue paper for the gift. The gift was gift wrapped, and then that was all free of charge. And they would come from Philadelphia, they'd come from New York City, they'd come from Connecticut, they'd come from all over because Mother and Dad gave so much to the customers.
Because that was back in the 40s. People dressed. Remember, they had the parasols. We would see pictures of Atlantic City boardwalk. But now it's, boardwalks now are Ferris wheels and lights. But it was something to do. It was a very narrow boardwalk. Remember, Arthur? It was very narrow, just a walkway.
Back in those years, people dressed to walk.
They did.
Today, they undress to walk.
That's true.
I remember going for weekends with friends of the family, the bachelors, and we would come in the distance, and I remember as soon as you cross the causeway, we get that salt air. And we knew we were getting close to home when we saw the three masts of the Lucy Evelyn. That was really exciting. So it was a landmark.
The exception of Barnegat Lighthouse, which was on the opposite end. That was a draw, but that was dull compared to the ship.
And Mother and Dad did all the interior. Dad built all the shelves and the cases and the showcases. And
Then the cases were built. So you're going in the ship and you're looking all around and you're seeing these beautiful wooden cases with glass fronts, which Dad built. That's where the craftsmanship came in. And there were cases for beautiful Peruvian scars or cases for the jewelry from the Pearl people. And
going into the ship, you walk in and there's this huge ship's wheel hanging right over the front table, a display table. There was a jewelry counter. There was the leather. They had Etienne Anier leather, china, glassware, crystal. I mean, everything you'd need, from topsider shoes to, you know, little ceramic figurines to Dalton mugs, clocks, barometers, everything in one spot. People loved it.
The ship was a place where you could go find the most wonderful nautical gifts. You know, we have malls today. The ship was like a mall back then, and there were only malls in the 40s, 50s.
There was a toy section, there was a sporting goods section, there was a cards section, everything was sectioned off, and everything in absolute perfect order. My mother, having designed the ship's wheel, was in the center of the ship itself, great huge ship's wheel, not the schooner Lucy Evelyn's wheel, but a wooden ship's wheel from the ferry boat. And that was her display table. And every week a new display was on that table, from Hadley ware, handmade in Louisville, Kentucky, to Billingsley rose from England, to anything, wedding pattern. Anyway, every single week displays were changed. And that was Mother's doing in the ship.
Well, there was a boardwalk around that had...
We had 11 shops total, I believe. There was a shell shop, which my sisters put themselves through school with, college, both of them. And there was a spice shop, a baby shop, a fudge shop, a candle shop, a Christmas shop, a hobby shop, an aquarium shop, a peanut shop.
Each time Dad and Mother found a top of a rabbit hutch, that became a shop. They took the rabbit hutch, they put a concrete foundation on it, and that became... My brother was next to get a shop. He's 22 months younger than I. So first he had an aquarium shop with fish and anything related to fish food. That was Nat, Nathaniel Trollier III, Nat, brother to me, because I couldn't pronounce Nathaniel.
And they all had these neat bay windows, and they were all and they were all cedar lined with Peggy cypress. And I paneled every one of the interiors right up to the ceiling for this neat stuff, and it smelled like a cedar forest when you walked in, and the ladies would say, "What is that smell? It doesn't love it in here." And that was a pretty neat thing. Daddy had me sand the walls once in a while when they were up for a long time, and make the something melt come back, you know.
I got a kick out of the clever names.
Oh yeah, this is Mother again.
There's Mother coming up with, like, the baby shop, she called it the jib. You know what a jib is? A three-cornered sail.
Like a diaper.
Now, how many people know what a jib is, you know? And now she had the bowsprit. The bowsprit. And people used to look, let's go in this here bowsprit place. You know, I used to get a kick out of New York.
They had a half mast of the bowsprit, the bow of the ship. Then there was the aqua shack. That was kind of okay. The galley was a spice store, because they would change over here and there. You know, everything would change. And the Christmas cargo, and the toy chest, and the seaman shack, and the ice cream was King Neptune, because it was Dairy King, King Neptune. See.
All of the shops were strictly family. Nobody that I know of ever rented anything from them. They worked for them. Everybody had their store, right? You had the bowsprit, and Ellen had the toy shop. When I came around, you started with a shell shop.
The shell shop was the first.
Yep.
That was Dad's.
When she was 11, right?
Yep.
You started the shell shop.
You're correct, and it was all family.
Mm-hmm.
And as each child, the 4 children first, and then the grandchildren, as the 4 children became responsible and showed that they had an interest, then Mother and Dad were their tutors.
There were no such things as possession. It was Mom, Dad, and indentured servants. Period.
We're all workers, And it was very important that we contribute and that we work, and we all were paid. My first wage was 25 cents an hour, and I was expected to be on time and to fulfill the job that they gave me, whether it be folding gift boxes or restocking votive candles, or I think my brother always got stuck raking gravel to make it look nice. I never understood that one, but he raked gravel for hours and hours.
My brother Nat, my older brother Nat, he and his wife had a candle making business, and they made the votive candles and dip candles that they sold in the candle shop. So it was all very family. And Arthur and I lived above the candle shop in a little apartment. And then Muff, my sister, with her family, lived above the bowsprit gift shop. And then my younger brother and his wife and family lived above the candy shop eventually. So, yeah.
At one time I had 3 shops because there weren't that many children.
He hired 20 or 23 sales girls every spring, and asked them to please stay through Memorial Day or Labor Day, and half of them would party out a week ahead of time, and that was bad. In fact, I think that's the only thing I really ever know that Dad did illegally in his life that I could remember. He would hold a paycheck back, the first paycheck, and say, "I'll give you that on Labor Day," with your Labor Day check as well, and that was not legal. And he had to pay a $15,000 fine when they found one of the girls turned him in, I guess.
Some of the girls are still in touch with her today.
That's true. They loved it. Everybody loved working for Mother and Dad, thought they were great. I mean, it's just a real camaraderie,
So we were taught work ethic. We were taught to work, and then when you're tired, work some more. There was, my grandfather had a built-in idle alarm. He could tell that your backside was approaching a stool. He could, and he wouldn't come in and say, "Get up." He wasn't stern like that. He would pass by the minute you sat down. You could have been working 8 hours straight, and you were like, and he'd say, "Wish I had time for that," and keep walking. And you knew exactly what, get up, you lazy person. That and PIB. PIB was written on everything that could be moved. Put it back.
At our heyday, we got so overrun by people, it was never air conditioned, that we charged a quarter to come on board to go in the gift shop, and people couldn't understand that. I'm going in to buy a postcard and I got to pay a quarter. Well, you get your quarter back as soon as you buy anything, which was okay. But it cost you a quarter to go on the deck to see the museum and run around and get yelled at for running on the deck.
My job was to collect quarters for the people who wanted to go up and see the Captain's Museum up on the top deck. That's probably my earliest, is standing on those steps, collecting quarters.
I too was in charge of you stood at the bottom of the steps Dad made to go up to the captain's quarters. Well, 2 young boys ran up those steps so fast that I couldn't catch them. They didn't put their quarter in. You got a history, a yellow, good-looking, complete history, which you ought to have one of the ship. I went after them, and I got them out on what we call the poop deck up. And I said, "Young men," I was all of 12. "You are one of you will stay here. I'm going to keep this one here. The other will go home and get that 50 cents, 1 quarter for each of you. And you will not come back unless you have it, because this young man is staying with me." Both of them. And the one fellow went home. I kidnapped that one, right? And I had no right to do this. And the other fellow went home, and his father was Commodore of the Spray Beach Yacht Club, which is my dad's original yacht club, and broke a chair laughing that his son could be so intimidated by a girl.
So Dad would put a counter in, and on the last couple of years, we would have 6,000 people a day pay a quarter to come in on board. That was a lot of quarters.
I would say at the time, that was the tourist spot.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, in the belly of the Lucy, you could barely walk.
I mean, it was full. There's thousands of people came through.
Oh, yes. Every day.
Not everybody bought something, but it was something to do. And on rainy days, oh boy, we were slammed. There's nothing else. You can't go to the beach, so you go shopping. So, yeah, it was major.
And Lacey was put to work. We all had jobs. You were not allowed to be idle, ever.
No.
And as I got older, the more I spent time at the Lucy Evelyn, the more there were chores. And I noticed that my grandfather had these bundles of heather that he used to sell, and I asked about it, and I found out that he bought it from local clammers or some guys. And so he said if I could go cut heather and bring it back, I could sell it to him. So that became one of my jobs. I'd go out in my little boat and go to an island, and I would cut wild heather and bring back bunches of it. But what I didn't realize was they sold the heather for about $1 a bunch, but I didn't get $1 a bunch. I got a quarter. So no matter how much heather I picked and brought back, it didn't seem like I could ever get that $20 bill that I was trying to get a hold of.
My brother Nat was the maintenance guy. You know, he kept everything up to ship shape. So it was his job.
I went on minimum wage, and he took out my apartment rent. And this, I'm saying bad things about him, and yet he was tough. He was really tough. But that helped me in today's tough world.
Another thing Dad always did, and Mother, was to encourage any young people who had a craft or had a talent, and they would then give them the pound boat to be their backdrop, let's say, and the microphones, and then they would let them pass the hat, and then my dad got his share. My dad always got his share. I paid $100 for my apartment, so he got his share. You know, but that's my dad, very much of a businessman.
So when I became interested at 13, I got my first job on the water with a wonderful guy named Captain Fred Combe.
Super guy.
Who's still alive. And he gave me a break. I was in military school, and I wrote him a letter, and I had my English teacher correct it 3 times because I don't have every word right and spelled right. And I mailed it to him, and I said I'd be available in May. I think it was May 31st or something like that. And could I go to work with him? And he never answered. So on May 31st, I wanted to go see who he did hire. And I had this letter proofread 3 times, you know. And I looked, and there was nobody there except him. And he said, well, get the hell on the boat. Of course I had the job, he said. Well, that's the way we started. He was just wonderful, though.
My most vivid memory of the schooner Lucy Evelyn is playing on deck, on the top deck with my cousins, and dressing up in a little sailor outfit.
Playing on the ship, you know, from one end to the other, up on the deck, down below, playing hide and go seek when the customers were there buying stuff and hiding all over the thing. It was a great place for hide and go seek for sure.
Donnie and Tommy, my cousins, and I and friends would sneak up onto the deck of the Lucy, and we'd play war up there when we were little kids. I remember running across rooftops up there. I remember actually one time jumping off the roof of, I think it was the toy shop.
It was more about the deck, I think, than the museum.
They wanted to get to the deck.
It's fun to run around up there and play, try and grab the rigging and try and climb the ladders and on the masts.
That's what the children did.
And there were these, I don't know what they're called nautically, but there were these things that would come up, big circles. You see them on Popeye cartoons, you know.
The
And we
sextant?
used to, no, the aerators or the communication devices,
Oh.
whatever, those big round things that would come up, and we used to holler into them and listen for the echo, see if we could hear each other across the ship.
The first work I really did for Dad was when I was tiny. I mean, I worked all through the ship, cleaning it out, looking through all the hidden wonderful compartments that you would find in a derelict like that.
Long Beach Island was a great place to grow up because in the wintertime, there was not many residents at all. And, you know, that's where I learned most of my craftsmanship from my father. Was in the wintertime, he had a workshop and he was always building something, and I was always down there with him watching and learning and listening.
The best time of the year was, you know, after the tourists all left. So when it was fairly still warm in the fall, but you know, no one was around. The island was all ours, and fishing was great. It was you know, it was a fun existence actually doing that.
Growing up on the island, you had to love the ocean because that's what there was. I mean, when you got out of school, you went down and played on the beach. Or when we had a nor'easter and all the cool shells came up on the beach, you were down there picking them up and driving the beach buggy.
Selling them in your shell shack.
Yeah, we were always trying to sell stuff, that's for sure, without a doubt.
Stuff. I sailed when I was 6, my own little sailboat, and that was pushed on me. I hated it. I had the heaviest, nastiest sailboat in the whole fleet. They wondered why I come in last. I'd turn my sailboat over on purpose just so I could get towed home and wouldn't have to finish the race. Serious. My sister always won. I mean, that's what. But she had the lighter, better Neff-built boat, which was no comparison.
He let us go, me go, as soon as I could start my motor. That was the key. I wasn't allowed to leave the dock until I could start it. So it was probably, I'd say at 7, I finally got enough kahunas to be able to pull start the motor, and that was it. Then I was allowed to go. But I wasn't allowed to go to the other side of the bay. I had to stay on the island side. So my brother, he'd just take off and leave me in the dust, going to the other side of the bay. And that's where the good fishing was, or the good bait catching was. But we still had fun ripping around the bay, and it was a fun place to grow up for sure.
I'm a very gregarious person, and I like to take care of customers. I would get a kick out of being behind the register and ring up the sale, and all of a sudden, and that'll be $1 for parking. And people used to laugh. So Ellen's father tried it. Now, this is a very serious New Englander. Mm-hmm. And that'll be $1 for parking. I'm not paying you $1 for parking. And then he turned around. He said, well, it worked for Arthur.
He tried so hard.
Tommy, my middle boy, would get dressed for school, get all ready to go, go out and hide behind a hedge. And about 2 o'clock that afternoon, I'd wait for him to get off the bus. He didn't get off the bus. And I'd go over and look, and sure enough, he's been out in the bay catching stone crabs all day long, right? Supposed to be in school.
The boardwalk was a gold mine. You could go and between the cracks, the right places where people were getting in their change purses or whatever. You get in there, you put your chewing gum on the straw, and you push it down in the crack and come up with the coins, and then go spend them in the ship, of course.
We made big bucks. We did. And Tommy was this. He doesn't remember this. Tommy and I had how many businesses? We had at least lemonade stand, cookie stand. Octopus stand. Yeah, we made octopuses out of old yarn, dolls, you name it. Well, and my job was to be the lookout, and his job was to sneak across the other side of the street where we were not allowed to be customers nor seen, right? Because they were the other side of the street. Well, there was a bakery over there. And we weren't supposed to go over there, but Tommy, he was fast and sneaky. So he would take some of our profit and sneak over there. And they had dollar bags of broken elephant ears. That was our favorite. And he would go over and spend $1 of that was 4 glasses of lemonade. he would go over there and get us a bag of broken elephant. And then we had to hide the elephant ears, because you weren't allowed to have merchandise from across the street.
They weren't allowed.
But yeah, they were good. If whoever's watching this, it was a good bakery. It really was.
We only lived a block from the Coast Guard station.
Yeah.
And our oldest son, Donnie, he could never do it today, but he lived at the coast. He would come home from school. He had his own little Coast Guard uniform he put on.
Yeah.
He would run in, get changed, put his little uniform on with his little sailor hat over the Coast Guard station, and he was their, what do you call it?
Mascot.
Mascot. And
I mean, young.
he ate dinner there with them.
Yeah, he didn't sleep there, but he ate
lunch
and dinner every day, just about.
Well, in the summertime.
Yeah.
But he
went on the boats. He went on the rescue missions with them.
You could never do that today.
He would drive their 30-foot crash boat right up to the dock. I mean, he was amazing. But and then
during inspection, he would be in line, standing there with his little hat on and his little uniform, and
he showed new guys in the Coast Guard stuff to do. It was pretty neat. We were proud of him. Until one day, he always wore a knife and a marlin spike, and he had the cutest little red-headed girl that was in love with him.
I had some girls that showed up there at the Coast Guard station one afternoon, and I ran around and I had the patch and the whole 9 yards, the whole uniform, and I had a knife on my side like all the Coast Guard guys did, and they took my hat and took off with it, and that wasn't really a good thing. So I ran and got my bike and I started chasing them, and I'm just going like a bat out of heck, and I'm like, well, how am I going to get them to stop? And I was like, oh, my knife. So I pulled my knife out and just took my knife by the blade and just threw it and stuck it right in their back tire, and the air leaked out of the tire, and then they stopped, and then I got my hat back.
And the commanding officer just happened to be in the yard at the time and saw it, so they court-martialed him. Yeah, I mean, he had stripes. He was second-class petty officer quality by this time, and he'd done this for 2 or 3 years.
And they took his stripes away from him.
Cut him right off his shirt. Took him off.
That was
made him
it.
do extra duty. They gave him the nastiest jobs they could find for the next, and he never whimpered. He kept going back for more and more and more.
That sense of community too, where you knew that at least they had you convinced that every person on that island knew that you were a Ewer. And if you bent over sideways and you couldn't, they would get a call. So we knew that we were on our best behavior no matter where we were, no matter what street, what bike, what beach, that there were eyes, that there was a community raising us, and that we had to live up to their last name.
And then when I was born, they had Hoppy, the nurse, and they had Maud, another nurse. And then one day, Muff came home and saw this hefty black lady vacuuming in the house, and she got all nervous, and that was Bertie. And then Bertie was with us forever. She brought me up. She taught me my religion after school. I had to read a little blue book. I would write her letters for her because she couldn't write well, and she'd always send letters. She would send money to care for the children and all these charities, and just a great lady. And she's so cute. She would say, Miss Ellen, under this skin, I was the same color as you. Just like that, just as plain. And she demanded respect. And you didn't come in the kitchen and not say hello, Bertie.
We used to have mischief night. You know what mischief night is?
I told you.
Oh, come on, you don't.
No, I don't.
Get out.
The night before Halloween
The night before Halloween is legal time to do bad stuff. You never heard of that?
No.
Oh, my gosh.
Look it up. I mean, please do. I mean, that's as known as anything. And we, as adults, would run. We would run up and down the street, opening fire hydrants, taking toilet paper rolls and throwing them across people's swimming pools. Anything we could do for mischief. Not really bad stuff, but some of it turned out to be bad. We took huge concrete planters that would be on people's front porches, and made barricades across the street. So when the cops came to chase us, they They had to stop and try to drag them out. They were alone, you know. Run through people's backyard and get caught on a clothesline and rip us right off our feet, damn near kill us. I mean, we were serious mischievers, and it was one of the most fun days of the whole year.
It was just a known thing back then. Mischief Night was...
We opened a fire hydrant up, and they didn't find it. We knew they wouldn't. And it cut a hole in the macadam, in the tar, big enough for the whole front end of his cop car to go down in it like that and stop. Well, they had to get a wrecker to come get the cop car out. Then he came to my house and he says, "Come on, I'm begging." He knew it was me. I had a couple cohorts and her. "Please give us a break. Lighten up, would you?" Okay, so we gave him a break.
February 1972. I had just been out to dinner off the island with a guy. Came back and saw the glow. Oh, your heart sinks.
I was asleep, and I remember hearing my mom talking, and I walked out, and she said, "Something bad has happened."
And every time, of course, you hear a fire engine, you hope it's nobody that you know. And it was the ship. It was the ship.
My memory is looking out our bedroom window towards the ship, because we could look right up the island towards the ship. And you could see the smoke and not so much the glow of the fire, because I think it was more internal at that time. But that night that it happened, it was cold, you know, and freezing temperatures, I guess. And we weren't allowed up there. I don't remember going to it until the next day.
Got closer and closer, and your heart sinks, and you just know, and sure enough, it was on fire.
The fire started, I think, around 11 o'clock at night, and the police chief called my house, and it was howling northeast, so we couldn't hear it.
Freezing cold.
And I got there and opened the back door with him. We opened the back door, and it looked just like the inside of a barbecue. Bright red coals everywhere I looked, as far as you could see.
What they say happened is that the furnace in the stern of the ship caught fire.
Rusted out flume on top of an oil burning gun type heater, which was put in 48 and never updated. So that tin work, that metal work, it was time. It was a howling northeaster, 11 degrees, and it never shut off. Just kept cooking. And just above that was these dried out timbers. And once that lit, they could not stop it. It burned for 3 days. And then they said, "Well, we might as well let it burn." I remember the fire chief saying that.
The inside hull caught fire. So you have an outer hull and the inner hull, and the fire just engulfed that whole ship.
The fire got between the ribs and the inner and outer planking, and the jets from the fire hoses couldn't reach it, so they just burned in these little chimneys each way. And then the fire chief said the masts are going to fall, and they're going to fall into the marina and crush some boats over there. I said, "No," I said, "I just tapped all the pins, which are all now free, and pulled it over with my little Bronco, pulled the mast over," that was a heartbreaker for me. And that's when I knew it was lost.
We felt like we'd lost a child. The terrible pain. It had been part of our lives, every one of us. And Mother and Dad were devastated.
Very sentimental about the ship. It was hard to call him and tell him, say, "Dad, we've lost this ship." What? Yeah. And that was his lifetime achievement. I mean, there it was, gone. What can you do?
The ship stayed in its burnt state for a while. I remember crying, and I was in 2nd grade and at the Beach Haven Elementary School, and I saw the cranes grab the bowsprit and rip it off, and I remember crying
sort of ripped a part of you.
Crying at the window at my grade school, watching the ship being torn apart. But the bones of it were there.
The town said, we will not allow you to rebuild the ship unless you rebuild it out of concrete. That was the fire code now.
No one was hurt. It happened at like 12 midnight, 1 in the morning. Mm-hmm. There were no customers. There were no children nearby. There were no injuries from the firemen.
But they ended up saying that it was a blessing that it burned, because the wood from sitting in the wet soil the wet sand for so long, they said that you could take one of the stakes, the metal stakes that held the hole together, and you could just punch it right through the wood, that it eventually would have had a catastrophic failure. So it's good that it went the way that it did.
It was a blessing.
But it was hard to watch.
Once it was all cleared out and there was an empty hole, you could see berms. Dad trimmed it down, and he actually had sales of the items that were in the warehouse behind it. So he was still doing business.
It was a great loss. But knowing my parents, they, bit the bullet and they sold things out of that warehouse, and they sold things down at the other shops. And we were all given lectures, sell, sell, sell. The lessons that were learned are: the customer is always right, to be respectful at all times, to give the right change, and if you don't, make it right, to keep things orderly, to buy the best quality that you can afford, and to, at all times, respect and admire the salesman. You have quite a hard job.
I think integrity, honesty, respect, courtesy, as far as your staff goes, and keeping people happy. Customer's always right. Do what you can do, make a difference.
Thousands and thousands of people did enjoy the Lucy Evelyn, thanks to Mother and Dad. And they were always there. They worked 24/7. They were never shirkers of that responsibility. And to that, they set a wonderful example to all of our family, especially my sons. As workaholics as they are, I owe that to them, because that's what I instilled in them. That's what he instilled in me.
I think that's one of the reasons that you've made the describe family and community from the 40s to the 70s. And I think that we all know that that's changed drastically, and that you don't have that same sense of community. They have a strong sense of family, and they know that we're always there for them. And I think that has not. That's the constant through all of this, is that we're your family.
Seeing it start all over again with my son and my daughter. And now my son at 32 is a captain as well, and working on boats, and he's kind of grown up, not doing the same thing that I did, but a lot of the same things. And he wasn't around, obviously, when the ship was there. But we've got a whole another generation coming with him, and he's got a passion for the ocean as well, with the fishing and the diving and the, everything that we do.
Their ideals, their faith, their attitude toward people, their patience. There's just so many things that they gave to us, which then we in turn can give to our children.
I think I'd like to say thank you to my Aunt Muff for you guys coming and doing this. And thank you to my father for teaching me everything I know. And my grandfather. He did a good job.
Again, Dad, he did an amazing lot of work in a short period of time with an amazing town full of wonderful people that helped him out.
I think that your main purpose of this video is in honor of her parents and all that they did accomplish despite the adversity in their lives, and all that they gave to us, not by necessarily giving, but by making us work for it. There was never a gift that wasn't earned. Yeah. You want a new bike? Fantastic. You come up with the first $50 and I'll give you the second $50. There was always meeting you halfway. There was always a lesson. There was always something that you had to do or to overcome in order to get whatever it was that you had your eyes set on. So that was a pretty valuable lesson.
It was.
To really work. Life is work.
My grandparents basically spent their whole lives there. And, they loved to have their children nearby. It's interesting now to know that we really don't have a presence on the island. Everyone's, gone to different areas. But that history is still there, and it's something that will remain there as long as the island is afloat. With sea level rise, you never know where we're going to go, right? But and that island could go away at some point. But as long as there's still some sand there, I think the schooner history and the history of the Ewer family will remain.
And so the Lucy Evelyn, outward bound, sails on, filled to the gunwales with the richest cargo of all, our happy memories of her and her times.
Life's a bustle of traffic.